So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Cindy Ingold. I'm one of the panelists. I'll be talking in a few minutes. But first, we're going to have a recording of an introduction that Tom Dublin did. And Tom's the one that got us all together to come to this conference. We're all first-time Charleston attendees, so we thank Tom for doing that. But I'm just going to go ahead and play the introduction now.
We are approaching the 25th anniversary of the online appearance of women in social movements in the United States. This project began as an undergraduate research seminar focusing on women in social reform movements in the progressive period. Faculty and students got lots of support from reference librarians at the State University of New York at Binghamton. Librarians provided students with research support, and in the spring semester of 1997, taught students the rudiments of HTML so they could post the products of their research on the internet. We posted the first two students' projects in December 1997. We expanded the Binghamton website steadily over the next 5.5 years, and in 2003, we partnered with Alexander Street, a small online publisher, and we officially became an online journal and database. With funding now as a subscription-based publication, we added an editorial board, developed a system of peer review, and reached out to faculty and graduate students with a call for submissions of document projects. If anything, our collaboration with librarians has intensified since we relaunched our website as an online journal and database. A fair number of our authors have been librarians. Others serve as peer reviewers. Still others have served as editors for portions of two online databases we have produced to complement the U.S. focus of our initial database. In the last 5 years, we have also produced a freely accessible database, the Online Biographical Dictionary of the Women's Suffrage Movement in the United States. I have relied extensively on librarians who have served as state editors and have coordinated the work of our crowdsourcing volunteers who have prepared biographical sketches of grassroots women suffrage activists. Additional librarians volunteered to research and write their own biographical sketches. We are fortunate to have with us today 3 academic librarians who have served in a variety of capacities in these collaborations. Let me introduce all 3 of them now, and then we'll transition to the live-in portion of our session. Cindy Ingold is an associate professor and the Gender and Multicultural Services Librarian at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She will discuss a collaboration that led to the creation of a document project on women in social movements, answering the question, how did women's groups in the American Library Association promote activism around women's issues in librarianship during the 1970s? Primary source documents created by the Task Force on the Status of Women in Librarianship and the Committee on the Status of Women in Librarianship reveal a strong activism among women librarians in the late 1960s and early 70s to change the inequitable condition they felt existed within librarianship. This movement also helped usher in a more systematic examination of women's role in librarianship by historians. Kelly Blessinger, our second speaker, is the head of access services at the Louisiana State University Libraries. She has served in the LSU libraries for more than 2 decades. Initially, I asked Kelly to prepare biographical sketches of Louisiana's suffragists, and she got back to me asking if she could reach out to library colleagues because she thought there would be great interest in the project. She will discuss recruiting other LSU librarians to complete the biographical sketches and her part in the project, including the tools she employed. Additionally, she will briefly cover 2 other online crowdsourced historical projects she is participating in, Freedom on the Move and the Heart Island Project. Our third presenter, Tammy Bush, a librarian at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, came to the suffragist crowdsourcing project by serving as our Missouri state coordinator. At that time, she was working as a reference librarian at the Missouri Secretary of State office. In her work on the online biographical dictionary, she recruited volunteers, assigned suffragists, and copy-edited completed sketches for about 70 Missouri suffragists. She welcomed the opportunity to work with volunteer authors from varied backgrounds and enjoys checking in on them to see how the work has continued. Using a lessons learned approach, she describes how the project made her a better librarian, collaborator, and project manager.
Switch information. It's so nice to have help, especially with technical things in our PowerPoint.
You should have it on the desktop there. Or do you have it on the drive?
It was on the drive.
It's on the drive.
Yeah, we had it up.
It's okay. There you go. Which one?
That one. I think that's going to start with. Okay. Okay. So I think this will work. No, maybe not. I will just use the enter key. So my name is Cindy Ingold. Can everyone hear me without the microphone? Maybe we'll just turn that off. Because we're in a small room. And as Tom said, and I know you probably couldn't hear him very well, I'm the Gender Studies Multicultural Services Librarian at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I actually work with American Indian Studies and Asian American Studies and political science. So the multicultural services part is Asian American, American Indian, political science was added on a year ago. But I've been a gender studies librarian most of my career. So Urbana-Champaign, for those of you who don't know, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign is a land-grant school, flagship school of the state of Illinois. We have 40,000, I know, undergraduates and 10,000 plus graduate students and professional students. So very large campus. So a little bit of background information. I presented with Tom and partner Kitty Sklar at the Berkshire Conference on the History of Women in 2009. And I think that was in Minneapolis, if I remember correctly. I had not met Tom or Kitty yet before. And after we presented, they were talking to me about, well, you should do a document project for this database, the Women in Social Movements database in the United States, about librarians being social activists. So I'm like, yeah, we are very socially active. I think that would be a great idea. So I submitted a proposal in 2011 to answer this question. And all document projects are based around a question that you're trying to answer, and then you're using primary sources to answer that question. So my question was, how did women's groups in the American Library Association promote activism around women's issues in librarianship during the 1970s? So the proposal was accepted, and I began work on the project during a sabbatical that I took in 2011-12. Besides the primary sources, the author also writes an introduction, it's called, but it's 12 to 15 pages describing the project and talking about it. So in creating the project, I relied on the archives of the American Library Association. Many of you probably know what the American Library Association is, the largest library association for librarians. We have their archives at the University of Illinois Library, so I was really lucky to have that. I focused on the Task Force on the Status of Women in Librarianship, which was founded in 1970, and the Committee on the Status of Women in Librarianship, which was founded in 1976. And I wanted to look at how those two groups helped the profession progress and how they helped to make things more equitable. So I looked at meeting minutes, conference materials, annual reports, and other primary sources produced by both groups. And I think this right now is the only document project in the Women's Social Movements US database talking about activism among librarians. So I really was pleased to be able to do this. Took longer than anticipated, as many things do. During my sabbatical, I had some issues come up, family issues that I had to take care of, so it took a little longer to finish things, but I did finish. I spent months and months going through the boxes of primary resources, and I'm a historian. I mean, I grad degree in history, so once you start getting into those boxes, sometimes it's hard to stop. I also relied on a wealth of secondary sources. Some of you may know, but there has been a lot written about the status of women in librarianship. So this project fits into that whole corpus of work about the status of women in a women's focused field, but yet the profession has not always treated women well, and we've all often been the lower workers and so forth. So my conclusion, I did find that these two groups did bring much needed attention to the sexism and inequity faced by many female librarians in the profession. And just one example, for a long time, jobs were listed without any salaries listed, and women were like, well, this isn't fair, and we think that we need to have salaries listed in job ads, and that was something that they took to ALA, and ALA worked on that. And so that's just one example of something that was accomplished. And I think, next steps. So having done this project, which I really enjoyed, I'm going to start a second sabbatical in like 2 weeks. Which will focus on a third women's group within the American Library Association. And this is the Women and Gender Studies section of the Association of College and Research Libraries, which was founded in 1980. I belonged to this section for many, many years, since 1987. So I have a long history with the section. But I want to interview some of the current and past leaders of the section, because many of them are getting elderly, and I want to do kind of an oral history and get document their thoughts. But some of my initial questions: what were the primary goals and reasons for establishing this section? How did other women's groups within ALA influence the creation and structure of the section? How did the group handle issues related to inclusion of all voices? Lesbians, transgender people, Black feminists. Was the group exclusionary in any way? What factors led to the founding and so forth? And was there any resistance within ALA? So that's what I plan to do. I haven't started my survey. I haven't thought of all my questions that I'm working on my sabbatical. But hopefully it will be published in WASM and be part of that project. So that's all I have. And I think we're going to wait till the end for questions. So Kelly is next.
I'm going to turn the mic back on just in case it helps with the recording at all. So my part in this publication, which is both freely available online and it's also through Alexander Street Press, was to look into suffragettes from Louisiana. So these are two of my suffragettes right here, and their names were underneath, but sometimes PowerPoint has a mind of its own. They're no longer there. So let me introduce you to Lydia Whitcliffe on the left, and this is, oh gosh, we'll get to it, but I was depending on the names that were written there. So let's go ahead. Looks like it's cutting off parts of my slide. So basically, when I saw the call for contributors, which is what I was, it was from Cindy. Now that I go back through my emails, it was way back to 2018, so which seems like eons ago. Well, now that we've been through a pandemic and we don't know what year it is anymore. Basically, each contributor was asked to research and write a 500-word essay for each woman they were assigned. And each contributor, like I said, was assigned 2 people from the state they lived in, so it was possible to go look at primary resources if you needed to in archives if you weren't finding much elsewise. So that was a good thought behind that. So the original goal, and again, reviewing all the things from back in 2018, I was like, oh, that's right. This is what we were doing. The original goal was close to 3,000 sketches from all the states in the United States. So this was focused on the United States, but we know this happened over in many other places in the world too. Basically, it was supposed to be released on the centennial of women getting the right to vote, the 19th Amendment, which was in 1919, and then ratified in 1920. But we know 100 years, 2020 happened, and other things were on people's minds. So unfortunately, we didn't get the hurrah that probably would have happened had we not had a few more things to think about at that time. So I just thought it was a great idea, and I always think it's interesting to give people their due in history that might have been overlooked for various reasons. So I was excited about this. And prior to being the head of access services at Louisiana State University, I was the head of research. So I really enjoy research, and that's why I became a librarian, basically. When I contacted Tom, I said, how's it going with Louisiana? Would you like more help? And he said, well, actually I would, thank you. And so being a librarian, we all, even though some people consider it old technology, we're all on a lot of listservs. It's very handy because it comes right to us. We don't have to go out and search them. So I sent it out to basically everyone at my university at LSU and all the academic librarians in the state. In Louisiana, it's a little unusual. All publicly funded schools, all the librarians are tenure track. So we're all required to research and do service as part of that. So we're all interested in opportunities like this. So I knew people would be interested. And so that's why I wanted to put it out there. We also have a School of Library and Information Science at Louisiana State University. Not as many people interested from that, but we know they've got a lot of other things. They're trying to get a degree. And even if they may be interested, they might not have the time. And then I also contacted the director of the Women's Center at LSU. And she's great, and I've worked with her on other projects. So I said, hey, we're doing this project. I knew she would be interested, and I knew she had direct contact with a lot of faculty on campus. And I said, hey, tell the people you think that would be interested about this opportunity, and maybe they could integrate it into a class, and that did indeed happen. So that was great. So in the end, from Louisiana, it resulted in recruitment of 7 librarians, most from LSU. And then our coordinator was also from LSU, and you'll hear more about the coordination process with the next speaker. And then the history class, like I mentioned, of 30 undergrads. Okay, so next were some challenges. So Tom was very helpful when he started us off. He gave us a research guide as to start here, and here's some other things you can look at. So he said, first thing you want to do is start with this History of Women's Suffrage, Volume 6. It's like, okay. So I went to that, and if you see this presentation online, that is a link that takes you to an open source resource. So you can see exactly what it is. And I just linked the Google, there's several versions of it online, but that's the Google link right there. So basically, you can see at the top here, this is the example of this is exactly, because I copied and pasted, what was given to me when I agreed to do 2 women. And I wasn't kidding about her name, S.B. Hicks. Sorry. I forgot her name in the beginning, sorry. But there she is. And so this is all the information I had to go by, and go for it. 500 words, please. And And if you can find a picture, great. So I'm like, okay, the challenge is on. And as researchers, you know, it does become something once you start digging, you're like, I need this information, I'm gonna find it. It's a challenge. So it was fun too, though sometimes frustrating. And this resource here was written or edited by some very famous women's rights people. You know, but it's been out for a while. It gives basically the history of the whole movement state by state. And so at the end of it, there's an index, and you can go to the index and look up your name. And hopefully there's somewhere you can go from there. So for the first lady I had, even though she's number 2 here, Lydia Whitcliffe Holmes, she was in there. And that's because she was more nationally involved. She was involved when they tried to ratify it for the last state in Tennessee. So she was on the campaign, and I read her story and how she was there. And I was lucky because she was just a footnote in there. It wasn't like a big deal. Now, unfortunately, S.B. Hicks was nowhere to be found in there. But I did have this information that she was from Shreveport, Louisiana, which if you're not familiar with Louisiana, if you know Justin Wilson, the cook from the Cajun country, he calls himself Cajun. He's nowhere near the Cajun country, but my dad always loved him. And so so we knew she was from, I knew she was from Shreveport, and I knew she was the president of the suffrage league in Shreveport. And so for the other lady, I knew that she was born in 1877 in Kentucky. So this is all the information I had. And so I was like, I looked at the resource provided, and that was helpful for the one lady, but I said, now what? You know, and he gave us steps that we could look into, but some of them just weren't that helpful for these women. Maybe if they had been bigger, more well-known, but they weren't in JSTOR, they weren't in some of the things that would, if they had a big, huge part in the movement. And also at this time, which was a little infuriating to some of us, to be honest, and it seems hard to believe now, we all know that when women marry, it's pretty accepted that they have to take their husband's last name, or it has been. But back then, whenever women married, they lost their first name too, basically, too. So an example, and here she is again, Mamie Bourquin, which was the lady on the right there, she became Miss S.B. Hicks, okay? S.B. were not her initials, it was Samuel Bailey, it was her husband's name. So anywhere I tried to find her, that's how I had to look for her. So that, you know, some people came to me and said, oh, this bothered me, and I'm like, well, I guess, you know, it shows us historically, you know, where we were at this time, and this is why women were fighting for rights. It's just a reality, and, you know, not that long ago. So luckily, at the same time, I had gotten interested in ancestry, and that was one of the resources that Tom suggested, but as some of us may know, you do need a subscription if you want to go in and search and save information. It's a great resource. We do have it at our public library, but you have to be at the public library to use it. So that's an option, but usually I get the urge to search at odd hours. so I wanted to have my own subscription, and I was also researching my own ancestry. So that was an incredible resource because if you haven't used it, family members will upload pictures of these people, which you would have no access to otherwise. So that was probably the best resources, and the second best was newspapers. We have a subscription to this at Louisiana State University for Louisiana papers, but not for Shreveport, because Shreveport's way up north. So we're like, who cares about Shreveport? I guess. I won't say that, but I did. But it's just very different culturally. Everything is different in Shreveport than it is in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. So it is what it is. They decided, and it's more money. You know, the more you subscribe to, the more. And so we just didn't think the interest would be there. And there are universities up there that probably carry it. So every time I logged in at work, it defaulted to our system. So I just went ahead and got my own account there too, because then I could get all the Louisiana newspapers. And that's a great resource if you're ever trying to do any kind of historical research on relatives, on just a famous event. And we also contribute to that at LSU. We scan all papers still in Louisiana and upload them there. So that is mainly what I used. And basically, how I got her first name is in Ancestry. A great resource, which is free, are the census, is the census information. The census information is basically the only way I could find her birth name. Because even though it says, his name, and he's, the head of the household, she was next as the wife. So I'm like, okay, Lydia I had already, but then I found out, I was able to find out Mamie's name. So that was helpful to just to be able to give her a full biography, because she did stuff before she married too, and so you kind of want to give a full background, not just the suffragette period. Okay, and then finally, this is my final slide, and my first slide was called Louisiana Suffragettes and Little Anya. Now, that's a word I have never run across in my life before I moved to Louisiana, so I don't expect any of you to know it. And I was like, what is this land? And what it is, it's a Cajun French word that just means something a little extra. So I know we have some French speakers in the audience, and they're like, this isn't a French word, but it's a little adulterated Cajun style. So just quickly, these two other projects that I just wanted to mention that I really got into crowdsourcing, and I'm into history and just researching. So I read a great book by a professor at Cornell, Edward Baptist, and it was all about, the slave trade and how things changed over the years, and very interesting. And at the end of it, he mentioned, I'm also working on this grant-funded work that's, crowdsourced, open source, and it's called Freedom on the Move. And what it is you go in and there's ads like this of escaped slaves, again, just the U.S., and what you do as a contributor is you go in and transcribe this, because this is all they have, and they have most of the time very clear pictures of historical newspapers. You transcribe what it says exactly, and it says if you can find out where they ran from, where they might be going, their physical description. What this is going to do is help researchers down the line look up trends and basically what was happening. Whether they were wounded. It just gives a bigger picture of these people, which we don't have much primary documentation on. So I think it'll be really useful in the future. And there's been some studies of slavery, escaped slaves advertisements in certain states, but this will be the biggest one so far. And we have a number of ones from Louisiana that are just in French. So I encourage my colleague Trent, who's getting his PhD in French, to contribute to that, because I look at the French ones and I'm like, pass, let's see. Because there are words that you might not use anymore, or just locations. So it's better to do your own state here again, because you're more familiar with what they're talking about. And finally, I'm a big documentary watcher, so I happened upon this documentary about the Hart Island Project, and this is in New York. It's near the Bronx. It's an island, obviously, and it's a potter's field that's been burying New Yorkers that basically did not have anyone to claim them for over 200 years. And so there are a lot of historical events where people were buried here, where they didn't have the time, or it was a contagious issue, like the 1917 influenza outbreak, where they would take them here and just bury them, kind of to get them away from the people. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of the first AIDS people were buried. So if you're interested in that, this is, like I said, some of them they didn't know who they were, but a lot of them they knew their first and last name, maybe date of birth, definitely date of death. So again, with the Ancestry database, I could go in and census. Government records were the best way to find these people. But it's basically to give them a sense of dignity, because they were kind of buried in a way that no one would want to be buried, or kind of forgotten about. But this way you can kind of restore their dignity. So I enjoy working on both projects. So if you're interested in this type of thing, there's plenty of projects out there that you can contribute to. Right.
Hello, my name is Tammy Bush, and I served as the Missouri coordinator for the Online Biographical Dictionary Project. And today I'm just going to talk about 3 lessons I learned while serving as day coordinator. So a few facts first. In March of 2016, I was working as a library paraprofessional, and I saw a call for volunteers come through to write a sketch or 2 for the project. So I reached out to Tom Dublin and offered to write a sketch. And after a few email exchanges, I was officially the Missouri coordinator. Not exactly sure how that happened, but I don't have any regrets about it. But I really didn't know what I was getting myself into either. I'd never taken on a project of this scale before, and I definitely had moments where I questioned what I had taken on. But Tom was always there to offer help and encouraging words, and that really boosted my confidence and my success as I worked through the project. So of the 79 suffragists identified in the history of women's suffrage, I had 78 volunteers that included undergraduate students, graduate students, and independent historians complete 70 sketches. And despite the frustrations and challenges I sometimes encountered along the way, I took away from it things that I think made me a better librarian, really just a better person. So with my experience in mind, I'd like to share with you 3 things that might happen if you take a chance on an opportunity that initially sounds, well, terrifying. So lesson number 1. You might learn to embrace a growth mindset. I have learned not to be deterred by a rough start. So very early in the project, I was ghosted by a professor. I had passed over about 15 or 20 sketches, and despite regular correspondence throughout the semester, I never received the goods. And my confidence was a little shook for sure. So I reached out to Tom to let him know what had happened, and he shared with me that had happened to him before, not to take it personally, and in cases like this, we just let them fade away silently. So I was able to reassign all of those suffragists to another professor who actually became one of my favorite volunteers, that I'll talk a little bit about later. So if something in a project like this throws you off track, don't think that you can't come back from it. I've also learned not to be afraid to ask for help. So the quality of work from the undergraduates was understandably varied. So about half of those sketches came back to me unedited. And this was the case for one of the larger classes that I worked with on the project. And again, it was pretty early in the project. And I really was lacking the confidence to think that I could get the sketches in shape for publication. But I went ahead and reached out to the professor, and she was honestly happy to help. She asked me to send some of the sketches back to her, and she had her grad assistant work on them. And so we were able to get them ready for publication. So let's see. Lesson number 2. You might develop some stellar skills. So I am a much better project manager and collaborator since working on this project. And this has been very helpful as a tenure-track librarian who also supervises staff. As Kelly mentioned, researching women during this time was challenging, so definitely have improved research skills. I've always enjoyed writing, but I still love to learn from people that write better than me. And when I was struggling to find information on suffragist Geraldine Buchanan, I turned her over to independent historian Margot McMillan. She's the author of The Golden Lane: How Missouri Women Gained the Vote and Changed History. Margot actually wasn't able to find much more either, but despite this, I was so inspired by Margot's sketch and her ability to write Geraldine into history with this limited information. I am a much better editor now, and much less overwhelmed by the process. And overall, I'm just more patient with the whole process of collaborating, research, writing, and editing. Lesson number 3, you might uncover a passion in someone. I had previously researched and published on suffragist Charlotte Rumbold, but I had published on her as her as her role as a new woman in Missouri. So I was really interested in keeping Charlotte to myself and writing the sketch. But I just had so much interest in the project, I finally turned Charlotte over to volunteer Erica Godfrey. I think Erica fell harder for Charlotte than I had and really dug into the research. And I was able to use my librarian superpower skills to locate resources for Erica. And she shared with me what she had found, so I still got to learn about Charlotte. I recently got in touch with Erica to see how she was doing and talked to her about revising her sketch of Charlotte for publication in, it's called the Online Missouri Encyclopedia, and it is a project of the State Historical Society of Missouri. Tracy Wegman, who writes as Marie Wegman, was working as an archivist at the time when I signed her suffragist Bertha Passmore. And Tracy is also active in community theater. And she became fascinated with Bertha and is actually working on a script for a play about Bertha. So I can't wait to see that. And finally, Dr. Alyssa Ford, public historian at Northwest Missouri State University. She was the one that I talked about earlier, who I was able to pass those suffragists on to. I really enjoyed working with Alyssa, and she definitely reinstilled my faith in working with classes. In addition to her contributing a sketch of Alma Nash and the Missouri Ladies Military Band, Alyssa worked on the project with 2 of her classes, and she edited all the sketches before she sent them to me. I wanted to cry every time I got one. Alyssa said she really appreciated the opportunity to learn all about the women because she's not a Missouri native, and it was all new information. And she was able to use her research and her students' research in her future classes. She continued to publish and present after working on the project, including adapting her sketch of Alma for a publication in the Missouri Historical Review. She did a piece on suffrage in the Midwest for the National Park Service and gave presentations on the important role of rural women in Missouri in the suffrage movement for the suffrage centennial. So as Alyssa said, little has been done on suffrage in Missouri. So like me, she was very thankful to be part of the project. And that is all I have, and I think we have about 1 minute for questions.
We're happy to answer any questions if anyone does have any.
Yep.
If we're at time.
Or feel free to come talk to us.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, afterwards, we'll be here.
Amazing work, well done.
Tom too, Tom did,
Yeah.
Tom organized one. He's at Berkeley, he's retired now, so.
Yes, we're familiar with
Oh, okay,
Okay.
that's great.
We're with Alexander Street.
Ah.
So I have a huge passion for everything you're talking about.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's process. Question.
Question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, is there kind of a, I mean, I may have missed this, but is there like a criteria for a sketch? I mean, what are we talking about as far as like, as much information obviously you can, but what does it mean? What's like an outline of a sketch, I guess?
Well, I think the focus was the suffrage, their involvement with that, but it was 500 words was what they wanted around about that. And just basically as much information as you could get. I was laughing with a colleague because the newspapers at the time, if you've ever read them, it's like anytime someone sneezed, they were in the newspaper because they didn't have a lot to write about. And they're like, so-and-so's having a party. So Amy had so many parties. I was like, this lady, too busy to do anything else. But she was very influential in all the activities, political and otherwise, in Shreveport. So she was more active at the state level, whereas Lydia was more active on the national level. So I could find more about her outside of Louisiana. So it was basically whatever you could find that you could verify was about them.
Yeah, I would say and sometimes there was limited information, and that's why I brought to light Margot McMillan's sketch on Geraldine Buchanan. Because when I read it, I was just like, oh my gosh, there's not a lot here, but the way she just wrote it, about, it was based on Geraldine, but it was about women during that time. So it was a really good sketch.
I think it was really hard not to feel connected to these women too. After you've spent so much time researching them, you really felt attached to them. So that was another nice part about the project.
Yeah, but if you knew when they were born, when they got married, if they had any children, you know, things like that could be included in the sketch. But again, it just depended on what you could find.
So government records were the most helpful as far as straight up facts.
Yeah.
So the newspaper wasn't always reliable back then either. Not as much fact checking apparently, from some evidence I saw.
It's an ongoing project, right? I mean, the sketches aren't complete, right? Aren't they still looking for people to help?
That something like 30.
I think there's still some open sketches to be done.
Late,
It might
didn't
be.
get that.
There were
Yeah,
some
they're
that,
very
It's
short.
sparkling, it has a list on the website, if anyone is interested.
there were some that were deemed impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All them,
yeah.
and so we're welcome, anyone who wants to take one.
I know.
Awesome.
Super
Yes.
research
Come as a
there.
list on the website.
Yeah, I had a few impossible
On
ones.
the donors.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.